In this lesson, we'll be adding two new methods. We'll add a method to swap two different elements, which is really what happens when you're playing. You're swapping candies or blocks, and then you check to see if there are chains, if there are blocks that need to be cleared. So that's one of the methods we'll implement in this lesson. The other method will be a way for us to check whether two blocks are adjacent to each other. What does that mean? It means, for example, if this number 5 here is our block that we want to check, block 5 and 7 are adjacent, then block 5 and this 7 here, and this one down here, and this one to the left. It basically means that they are next to each other, facing one of the two main sides, which would be left, right, top, and bottom. So let's get started. Let's start with the swapping blocks. Match 3.board.prototype.swap will be a function that will receive two objects. It will receive a source and a target. Both objects need to have a row and call property so that they both get exchanged. So this we need, in order for us to exchange the value of these two, we need to keep track of what the array of we need like an auxiliary variable, which I'm gonna call temp. So temp will be equal to grid target.row and target.column. So this will give me a number, and that will be the temporary number. For example, I want to exchange row 0, column 0, with row 1, column 1. So the first thing I'm doing is my target would be this one, so I'm saying that temp will keep the value of 7. Then this.grid, now that we've kept that value safe, we can replace it by the source one. Source.row and source.column. And we also have to replace the source because we are swapping, so we need to basically exchange the values. Right. So this allows us to swap two cells. Let me refresh this and do what I said. I'm going to swap this one by this one with this one. So this gives me access to the board, and I'm going to type in swap. So the first object is going to be row 0, column 0. Whoops. The second object is going to be row 1, column 1. And that's it. I've just swapped them. And now if I do a console.log or our own custom console log method, see that they are different now. So before we had 7 and 3, and now we have 3 and 7. So now we can swap any two values from our grid. The second method that I wanted to implement is to check whether two are adjacent or not. Check if two blocks are adjacent. Because when you're playing, you can only swap adjacent blocks. You can't just swap any block in the game. You can only swap adjacent ones. So we need to be able to check that. And we'll do something similar in here. We'll also have source and target. And see how it doesn't matter which one is which. At the end, they just get swapped in our case, and in this case, they get checked. So how do we know that two elements are adjacent? Well, the difference in either x or y needs to be 1, because they need to be right next to each other, so the difference in the position is 1. But the difference in the position should only be either on x or on y. For example, 2 and 3 will have a difference in the columns and in the rows. We only need them to have either on the columns or on the rows. So that will be our way to know. So we calculate the difference in row, or y if you want to use coordinates. that will be the absolute value, because we want a positive number no matter what, between the row of the source and the row of the target. And then we also calculate the difference in columns in the same way. And then for us to know if they're adjacent, we'll create this variable is adjacent, which simply is making sure that the difference so if the difference in, say, row equals 1 and the difference in column equals 0. So if these two things are true, then yes, they are adjacent. Or the other alternative is the other way around, that the difference in row is 0 and the difference in column is 1. Now, in JavaScript in general, when you're comparing with equal signs to 0, it's always good to use triple sign, because otherwise false, the value false, makes it, if you use double sign, false also is true. So in our case, we really want to make sure that it's 0, it's not false. So I'm using 3 equal signs. It won't really make a difference in this case, but I'm mentioning it because it's something important. Return is adjacent. So that's all we need. We have some error here, so match, well, this should be match 3. Match 3. Okay, so I can check now if two elements are adjacent by using check adjacent, and I'm actually going to reuse the swap. So instead of swap, I'm going to type in check adjacent, and the answer will be false because these two are not adjacent. But if instead of that it was row 1 but column 0, so this one below, 7 and 5, now we'll get a true. So to summarize, we've done two things here, and these are all things that will be needed once we implement the player ability to play, basically. So one thing is to check that two elements are adjacent. That means that they are touching each other in either the top, bottom, left, or right. Then the other thing is that we're now able to swap two values anywhere in the board as long as we specify the row and column of both the target and the source and the target.